Well, that's not good. These 5 power tools are great, but without some essential upgrades, they are lacking in both safety and performance. Let's keep you safe in the shop, starting with the table saw, which has the potential to be very dangerous if you don't follow some simple steps. After doing things the hard way for years, I found 5 table saw upgrades that make me safer and more efficient when I'm in the shop. And one common accessory is great, but has a very dangerous flaw. Don't worry, I'll show you how to fix it. I cut my own hardwood edge banding for plywood projects, and there used to be a lot of wasted setup and measuring time. This would not be a big deal if I was just cutting one piece, but trying to get multiple pieces of edge banding to be the exact same thickness took a long time and was really tough. This thin rip jig from Woodcraft makes my life so much easier and has a very simple design. I'm not going to tell you how long it took me to discover this product because it's embarrassing, but I have it now and my life is better for it. You just set it and forget it. I mean, don't literally forget it because that would be dangerous, but you do set it and then every piece will be the exact same width. If you're going to be cutting a lot of edge banding or thin strips, this is a real changer of the game, as they say. Boom, same exact size. Okay, you know what time it is. It's height gauge time. This height gauge is from DFM. The design is just so simple and it saves me time, and anything that saves me time, I am a big fan of. Before I got this, I was measuring my blade like I was in the early 1300s when table saws were definitely a thing. Now, since I'm a big fan of saving time, I can measure my blade height a lot faster. It's basically the Michael Johnson of measuring. Oh, and don't worry about that hole in my insert plate. We'll fix that a little later. This is the bee's knees because you can measure it to 1/8 of an inch, and I generally don't need it more exact than that. Yes, there are cheaper height gauges on Amazon, but I buy from DFM for a few reasons. One, their manufacturing is in America. B, these little guys are self-standing, which is nifty. Roman numeral 3, these are softer than steel or carbide, so it won't damage your blades. And D, their customer service is awesome, so if you have a question or concern, they will get back to you super quick. Over the years, I have had tens of people ask me if I have a video on how I made the crosscut sled that I use. And until now, I've had to say no. But now I can confidently say still no, because that's a different, smaller sled. But I will now point them to this video because this larger sled can do 99% of what I need it to. It just can't do bevels. I'm making this back fence in a way to accept T-track so I can use a stop block for repeatable cuts. And in a minute, I'll show you how to make the most inexpensive stop block you'll ever see. So why even have a crosscut sled? Well, I view the crosscut sled as an essential table saw jig, and here's why. First, I get to say sled, which makes me think of Santa, and jig, which makes me think of an Irish jig, both of which put me in a good mood. It's also a great way of very accurately cutting large pieces of wood on the table saw. And I do a horrible job of demonstrating this, as I must have chosen the thinnest piece of wood in my shop to make this sled's first cut. You'll see that in a minute. I've seen people cut this T-track slot using a dado stack, but I didn't really want to mess with that, so I just made the middle piece of wood a little shorter. In a lot of crosscut sled videos I've seen, the woodworker cuts the runners, which go on the underside of the sled, to fit the miter slots perfectly. I am going to intentionally cut them narrower, which will make things a lot easier. I also saw one video where they used a crosscut sled to make their crosscut sled. It was phenomenal. To cut the main body of the sled to its final width of 42 inches, I'm using a track saw, but you do not need a track saw. You can use a circular saw with a straight edge, and I usually use my level as the straight edge. For the hardwood runners, I'm using some hickory, and I'm planing it down to be less than 3/8 of an inch because my miter slots on my table saw are 3/8 of an inch tall. As you can see, my runners are narrower than my miter slots, like I said they were going to be, because I'm not a liar. I hate to flaunt my wealth as I use pennies and dimes to raise up the runners, and I know I'm going to lose some subscribers because of this, but I've accepted it. I'm using some wedges on the runners, and this just made things so much easier because I did not have to cut the runners to be the exact size of the miter slots. If you decide to make this, you have to weigh down the sled with these exact items or it just won't work. It's science. I am so excited. Here comes my first mistake, and definitely not my last in the video, where I am extra silly. No big deal. What I thought was kind of a big deal was that this sled literally wouldn't move when I tried to push it. To be clear, this is not me trying to move my table saw cart. This is me trying to push the sled. To fix it, I used a product that many of you use to get rid of all your excess body hair, and there's no judgment. I don't do it because my pain tolerance is much too low, and as you've deduced by now, you all are much tougher than I am. To make this sled move smooth like butter, I did not use butter, I used wax. And paste wax is definitely what they use to remove body hair as well. Definitely. Ooh, look at that. All right. And no movement side to side. Success. So you can buy a stop block. People will take your money. But I've never felt the need to buy one because it's cheaper to make my own, and I felt that mine are just as good. But if you want to buy one, I've heard Jonathan Katz-Moses has a really great one. I'm cutting a slot in the top so I can move this stop block forward and back if I need to, and I decided to add oak dowels as reinforcement. The oak and walnut actually went together really well, much like Tom and Jerry or Batman and Robin. A crosscut sled is also great for preventing tear out, but what about when you're ripping a piece of wood, not cross-cutting it? Well, I have a solution for you, my friend. We're friends, right? Yeah, we're friends. That's where a zero clearance insert plate comes in real handy, but that's not all it's good for. We'll go through all the benefits of a ZCI, which is what the cool kids call it, but for whatever reason, if you didn't want to make one yourself, Daniel Dunlap at Daniel Dunlap Woodworks has a great Etsy store where he makes these out of beautiful hardwood, and they're fantastic. I used hickory for this because it's what I had on hand, but plywood also would work well. I just like using hardwood because I can plane it down to the perfect thickness for what I need. If, as you're watching this, you're looking at all the shop furniture I have in my workshop and you're a liking, I sell plans for pretty much all of it on my website, thomascustomwoodworks.com. You might have noticed that I have not used my micro jig gripper that much in this video, and that's not by mistake. I just haven't felt safe using it until now, and we'll get to that in just a couple minutes. Every insert plate is going to be different, and my table saw has certain protrusions, which forces me to have to chamfer certain areas and hog out material with a straight cut bit in others. If there's one tool that makes me a little nervous every time I use it, it's the router table. Am I alone here? I don't think I am, but in the comments let me know if you have a tool that makes you a little anxious when you're using it in the shop. I have my ZCI all cut to size and it fits really well on my table saw. I've even cut a little piece of wood that I glued on the end so it stays put when I'm using the saw. The last thing to do is what I thought was going to be the easiest part, cutting a slot in the middle with my table saw blade. I put painter's tape and a piece of 3/4 inch plywood on the top to try and decrease tear out. I used an 8-inch blade first, and then I switched over to my normal 10-inch blade. So I just did something really dumb, and if you're like, how dumb was it? If they were making a fourth Dumb and Dumber movie, they would only need me to play both Lloyd and Harry, and it would be called Dumbester. That's how dumb. I had no idea why smoke was coming out of my table saw, but when I stop this blade, you'll see immediately what I did wrong. Can you see it yet? Can you see how I was being super silly? At first I thought maybe it's that piece of plywood I put on top that's causing my table saw to overheat, or maybe just causing excess burning in the wood. And then when I was pretty much done with the insert, I finally noticed what was wrong. Yep, I had put the table saw blade backwards in my table saw. It really wasn't a huge deal and nobody was hurt. I just felt a little embarrassed, and I did have the thought of not including it in the video, and then I thought, nope, I gotta give the people what they want, me being silly. So why is a ZCI a great upgrade for your table saw? 1, it looks great. 2, helps with dust collection. 3, less tear out. And 4, it prevents those little teeny pieces of wood from falling down into your table saw. So you've made or bought your insert plate, which is fantastic, but now you need to know how to actually push the wood through your table saw safely. Well, that's where my next accessory comes into play, and I rarely heard anybody talk about this. I've used the micro jig gripper for many years like a lot of people, and it's worked well, but it has one glaring flaw. This Jacksonville Jaguar themed push block works pretty well. It has grippy tape on the bottom and can be adjusted for different sizes of wood. The handle is comfortable to use, and for most pieces of wood, this grip tape is enough. It even comes with an accessory that allows you to rip thin pieces of material safely, as demonstrated here by yours truly. That's me. Apparently I'm truly yours. Although it has this green grip on the bottom, sometimes it just isn't enough and the gripper slides along the top of the wood as I'm making the cut. I feel safe using this most of the time, but sometimes the wood can get pinched between the blade and the rib fence, making it tough to push it all the way through. Other times the wood can actually get stuck, and this happened to me a couple years ago, which was a little bit scary. Not scary for me, of course, because I don't get scared, but I would imagine it would be scary for other people. Luckily, I know enough not to stand directly behind the workpiece. This flaw can be easily avoided with one accessory, the MicroJig Gravity Heel Kit. The kit comes with 5 heels just in case they get chewed up by the blade, and it's weird to say, but sometimes the top of wood can be a little slick, especially when it comes out of the planer. This completely solves the issue, and I'm now able to push my workpiece all the way through every time. These 7 miter saw upgrades improved my woodworking a lot, and they are pretty dang inexpensive, excuse my language. They improve accuracy, protect these things on the end of our hands, and can help build things faster. But the last upgrade, well, let's just say it took me a while to take people's advice, and I am glad I did for multiple reasons. The first upgrade is a tool from FastCap called the $10 million stick, and it's great for keeping your fingers away from the blade when you're cutting a piece, but I was having a little issue. When I was using this stick on smaller pieces, even when I was pushing it down really hard, the blade would push the small piece of wood out of square. Here's what I mean, and I'm making it one continuous shot because, and I quote, "You can't always believe what you see on the internet." Abraham Lincoln. You can see the gap between the wood and the miter saw fence, which is not going to work when you need to cut a piece square. First, I think maybe I'm just being silly and using this wrong. I mean, that does sound like me. But when I looked at the FastCap website, they have photos of someone using the stick the exact same way I'm using it. So I tried something a little different. I turned the stick backwards. I'm a genius, I know, and it worked really well this way. One continuous shot again, and you're going to see something that no one has ever said about Michael Strahan's front teeth. No gap. FastCap, if you're watching this, the $10 million stick is a great idea and works wonderfully if the piece is supported by both sides of the fence. But it's not working well for smaller pieces. Either the stick needs to be used backwards or a complete design change is needed, or you can come out with a second stick for these small pieces called the Totally Helpful, Outstanding, Magnificent, Amazingly Sufficient Stick, or T.H.O.M.A.S stick for short. Until they come out with that amazing new product, use their $10 million stick along with this miter saw jig, which works great for small pieces in multiple ways. The base of this jig will be slightly wider and almost the maximum depth of my miter saw. The back fence will be 2.5 inches high, but a little shorter in the middle, and you'll see why in a second. This rubber piece, which is part of a really important upgrade you'll see later in this video, was getting in the way, so I cut the back fence about 3/4 of an inch shorter. Okay, so what is this jig and what's the point of it? All right, so this jig, yes, prevents these smaller wood pieces from getting out of square when you cut them, but it also is going to prevent tear out on the bottom and back side of your workpiece. To secure the back fence to the base, I'm using medium thick CA glue and accelerator, and to make sure that the jig doesn't move side to side while I'm using it, I'm adhering some 3/4 inch by 1/2 inch pieces of MDF on each side, also using CA glue. Okay, this next part is really important. When making the zero clearance cut, use the depth stop on your miter saw so you don't cut all the way through the jig. This will make the jig a lot stronger and more sturdy. This is a great and inexpensive jig to make for smaller pieces. And another great thing about this is you can really accurately line up your cut line to the blade for much more precision when you're making your cuts. Okay, we have solved the issue of tear out on smaller pieces, but what about tear out on much longer pieces, which frankly is the majority of what I cut on the miter saw? Well, we'll get to that in a little bit, but first let's talk repeatable cuts. If you have not met my buddy T.H.O.M.A.S, he's great and I think you would get along really well. He's reliable and really easy to work with. This is what I secure my stop block to, and to make sure my pieces are the exact length I need them to be, I put self-adhesive measuring tape on these foldable wings. I'm making my stop block out of white oak, and if you don't make your stop block out of white oak too, you're not a real woodworker. I like to build things with 4 legs: tables, stools, benches, etc., etc. And I need all 4 of those legs to be the exact same length, which is what makes T-Track with this stop block so useful. I get asked a lot what type of plywood I used for this mobile miter saw station I built, and I used birch plywood, and you can tell that it's birch because of the way it is. You just saw me bend over to turn on the shop vac that's connected to my miter saw, and a little later in the video you'll see why I'll never have to do that again. Here's the throat plate that came with my saw, and I'm going to test the tear out on 3 types of woods: plywood, pine, and white oak. I'm going to give you 2 solutions on how to decrease tear out on the miter saw. One is a little more time consuming, but you'll be the judge on which one is going to work for you. But I discovered something when filming this video. My throat plate adjusts to become a zero clearance insert. Good job, Bosch. And the results were pretty dang good. But if you don't have this feature on your saw, you can use some zero clearance tape. It's nice and inexpensive, and you literally just stick it on, cut it, and you're done. If time is an issue, I would say this is a solid choice for decreasing tear out. The results were pretty good, but not quite as good as the next upgrade I'm going to show you. And because I only had this product for 1 day, I cannot attest to the longevity of it, but just feeling the material, it seemed like it would hold up long term. A zero clearance insert plate is going to take a little longer to make, but is going to be the best solution to decrease tear out, and also will ensure that those little pieces don't drop down into your miter saw. I marked where my screw holes are going to be, and then I'm cutting the tape to size with an X-Acto knife, and this blue tape will be my template for the zero clearance insert plate. I did not come up with this method myself. I am not that smart. I got it from John Peters, who has a great YouTube channel, and I encourage you to watch his woodworking channel after you watch maybe 7 or 8 more of my videos. I do not have a great way to resaw wood in my shop, so I am thicknessing it, that is a word, don't look it up, using my planer so I can make sure it's the exact thickness I need it to be, which is about 3/8 of an inch. Some of the upgrades in this video are products from companies, but I am in no way sponsored by any of those companies. These are my completely unfiltered thoughts. If you've liked this video so far, feel free to subscribe. And if you like any of the furniture in my workshop, like my mobile miter saw station or this 2-for-1 tool cart that flips, I have plans for all of it on my website, and I'll put a link to that website in the description below. One issue I've had in the past is when making that first cut into a zero clearance insert plate, I've gotten tear out, but I'll show you in a little bit how to decrease the chances of that happening. Okay, I have to come clean. I wasn't going to tell you, and then I thought, no, I have to be honest. My holes didn't line up perfectly when I was installing the plate into the miter saw, so I had to whiten them with my drill. There you go, I said it, now you know. The mark of a good woodworker is not whether or not you're going to make mistakes, because you are. It's how good you are at fixing those mistakes. Blue painter's tape is how I'm decreasing the chances of tear out on this first cut, and it worked wonderfully. So how did this upgrade do on the tear out test? Let's see. Pretty gosh darn great. If it wasn't for the final upgrade, which you'll see next, this would be my favorite upgrade of the entire video. but both will help improve your health, like a lot. This is a dust chute from Travis at Shop Nation, and he makes a bunch of different dust chutes for a variety of miter saws. But really, how well does it work at collecting the dust at the saw and keeping it out of your lungs? Well, let's see. I made 5 cuts into a 2x4 with the shop vac off, and then 5 cuts with the shop vac on. I realized this doesn't test this dust chute against the dust chute that came with the saw, but the Shop Nation YouTube channel has a bunch of those videos that you are welcome to check out. I am so thankful I made this upgrade a little while ago, and my lungs are thankful as well. I mean, I had a miter saw for over 3 years, which did not have the capability to hook up a shop vac to it, and yeah, my shop was very dusty. This last upgrade is probably my favorite, and I'm really proud of myself for coming up with this solution all by myself with no help whatsoever from my YouTube or Instagram audiences. Okay, this is really cool. I am installing a double outlet which I will plug my miter saw and my shop vac into. 1 second after I start my miter saw, my shop vac will automatically turn on, and then when I'm done, the shop vac will automatically turn off about 10 seconds later. Not only is this convenient, but it will help out my low back not having to bend over to turn on and off the shop vac. The router can be a scary, dusty tool, but it doesn't have to be. I have 5 upgrades that I truly think everyone should make right now. And one of them breaks my brain a little. This is insane. A really good friend of mine, Paul over at Copper Pig Fine Woodworking, looked into it and found some research that concluded people prefer curves in furniture as opposed to straight lines and 90-degree angles. This also happens to be, in my opinion, the best way to go from a beginner to an intermediate, or at least make your furniture look a little more advanced. It also can be hard to achieve, but this little accessory is like the gateway drug to curves. It makes it super easy. When I started putting curves into my work, I started with a simple roundover and then went to rounded corners, like on a desk or a table. This is the corner template from Craig. Let's put it to work, but I do have some issues with it. It comes with 8 corner profiles and they're great. It's also pretty dang simple to use. I choose a profile, then put the jig on the corner of my workpiece, and then use a router with a top-bearing flush trim bit to do the work. I can also adjust the pegs underneath if I want to work with thinner pieces of wood, which is a nice feature. The first problem, there's some overhang with this jig so it doesn't leave a perfectly clean cut. At first I was a little frustrated and thought this was a big problem, but I just used some sandpaper to clean up those edges. Problem solved. And I realized that this being a little too big is way better than it being too small. That would be a nightmare. The other issue, it costs $40, which for a jig that doesn't work as well as I want it to is a bummer. Especially when I can make one for like $5 worth of material. I can take a piece of 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch MDF and then trace a curve on it. Then take it over to my belt sander to make the profile. And I can line this template up perfectly to my workpiece so there's minimal sanding. All in all, I would actually recommend saving the money and making your own corner profiles. But if you want something quick and easy and don't mind a little finish sanding, this gets the job done pretty well. If you're lucky enough to have a dado stack in your table saw, that's great, but you may not need one if you have a router. This is an edge guide and most router brands have one that's compatible. It's great for making dados and grooves in your workpiece, and sometimes it's easier to use the router than a table saw. It works well, but there's an annoying little gap in the guide which could cause your router to tilt inward at the beginning or end of the cut. This could mess up your cut and potentially be dangerous if you don't close it. Super easy, just take a scrap of plywood and secure it to your edge guide. Boom, problem solved. This guide is perfect for repeatability and it's not very expensive, but there's another issue: no dust collection. So I got this beefier edge guide which comes with a dust port. This does only work with a larger router, but you can also put your trim router in a plunge router base and it'll work. I know Bosch makes a plunge base for my Bosch Colch router, and I'm sure other brands do the same. On this guide, there is a dust port, and it actually fits the Rockler FlexiPort dust hose. But with this dust port, after using it to cut a dado, the dust collection didn't work very well. I mean, it's better than nothing, but that's a pretty low bar. So I moved the router closer to the guide to cut this rabbit, thinking that since the router bit is closer to the dust port, it would collect more dust. But although it was better than nothing, it still wasn't super great. This edge guide works well and can even adjust to where there's no gap like the other one. And even though the dust collection isn't great, it still sucks up the finer dust, which is the most dangerous. But what if you're not using an edge guide and you still don't want dust flying all over your shop? We'll get to that in a little bit, but first let's talk blocks. The upgrades I talk about generally either save time, improve accuracy, or make woodworking more enjoyable, or do all three. These setup blocks are definitely more in the save time category, but they help with accuracy too. I almost included these setup bars in the video instead of the blocks, but I found that these blocks are a lot more versatile. Versatile? Versatile. While those bars would be great at setting the height of your router bit, these blocks do more. Now, you shouldn't base your purchase on how nice the packaging is, but this PowerTech setup is pretty nice. It's just a nice bonus and gives me more confidence in the product when the packaging is more thought out and not an afterthought. These are cool because there are 15 different sizes, so pretty much every height is covered. These are great for the router and really help in getting your bit to be at the exact height you need it. But there's more. I can use them to check the blade height on my table saw, the thickness of my material, or the distance between material if I'm doing some sort of a ribbed project. And they're great on my router table. And they're blue, which is cool. I like blue, but I like orange better. There are cheaper and more expensive options, but I try and find the best value, and these seem to be solid. The router has to be the messiest tool in my shop, and this next upgrade actually does a good job at collecting dust. The router is my last remaining power tool that I use regularly where dust collection is atrocious. It's actually non-existent. Masks are great, but I'd rather get the dust at the source. Routing can also be unstable, much like my ex-wife, am I right? This guy knows what I'm talking about. The solution to these problems? Bam! Wait, that's not right. Whose baby is this? Bam! The WHITWORKS Trim Router Base. This thing is pretty dang cool, but don't take my word for it. Let's see it in action. Drew Witt makes these for all major trim routers, and it's super easy to install. This dust port works with multiple different hose kits, and the placement actually makes sense. It's right where the bit is. There's also this nifty handle. It keeps the router controlled, which is great because the router can be a scary tool. Not for me, of course, because I don't get scared, but for like other people. This port fits the Festool dust extractor, but if you're like me and don't want to spend an arm and a keg on a dust extractor, wait, that's not right. Arm and a Craig? I'll think of it. It also fits the, you guessed it, Rockler FlexiPort hoses. Now I'm just doing it to mess with you. It works really well. It gets almost all the dust. It's hard to tell how well it works when there's nothing to compare it to, so let's use it without the dust collection. Yeah, pretty dang messy. And if you've used a router before, you know that there is dust everywhere when you're done using a router on a project. It would be a lot worse if you're adding a roundover or a chamfer on an entire project, or if you're adding a corner profile. Arm and a Greg? My lungies appreciate this accessory. Sorry, I've been talking to a 1-year-old all day. And at under $100, this is a huge value. Speaking of value, you can't really beat the value of the next upgrade. I'm really excited to share it with you. With everything it does, I thought it would be a lot more expensive. It also might save you from buying a router table. This is the 6-in-1 universal trim router jig made by T.H.O.M.A.S at 3x3 Custom and Jonathan Katz-Moses. They've designed this to work with all major trim routers. The instructions are really detailed, and it comes with 2 handles, which is like twice as good as 1 handle. So what are the 6 things it can do? This thing is perfect for freehand routing, and the 2 handles makes it super stable. For this, you would put your trim router in a plunge base. Arm and a steg? Another way to go from beginner to intermediate is to start cutting circles. Squares and rectangles are a blast, but circles are the knees bees. They've made this jig to cut circles either by drilling a hole or not drilling a hole. Your choice. I have some sign ideas, and I think I'm going to make them circle signs. Yeah, I think that'd be cool. I like to use hardwood edge banding on my plywood projects, and up until now I've had to cut that edge banding very unstably. Not stability. Instabilicus? In an unstable way. The router has a tendency to wobble when using a flush trim bit on the edge of plywood. With this jig, there's a way to flush trim the edge using the face of the plywood. This is also an edge guide. No need to buy a separate edge guide. Hopefully you've watched up until this point instead of buying one of the earlier guides. Both edge guides I talked about earlier, especially the smaller one, are cheaper. But I'll get to the price of this jig in a little bit and you can decide which purchase is best for you. This jig also accepts guide bushings for template routing. If you do a lot of template work, this is great, and I'll probably do another video on guide bushings because they're pretty neat. Let me know in the comments if you think that video would be helpful. Last but certainly not least, last but certainly not least, is the ability for this to become a router table if you have a vise. And I'm not talking about Miami vise. Vices can be super nice to have on their own, but especially now with this jig. Okay, cost. This thing also will not cost you an arm and a... Come on, you can do this, Thomas. Arm and a leg! Arm and a leg. This thing will also not cost you an arm and a leg. This costs $70. What? When you think about all that it does, that is cheap. Like real cheap. I personally love this thing. It solves a lot of my problems at an affordable price. You did so good. Good job. Are you an actor? Yeah. Yeah? High five. Yeah, good job, honey. I love what you've done with your hair. I used to hate sanding. Dust everywhere, replacing sandpaper all the time, and sanding curves was a nightmare. These 6 upgrades make sanding so much better. And the last upgrade? Well, let's just say Woodpeckers does not want me to talk about it, but it's so good, I'm going to anyway. I've been trying to find ways not to drink the Kool-Aid and buy a very high-priced sander. Everyone that has one swears that it makes sanding so much more tolerable, and maybe I'll get one day, but not today. Let's make sanding better without needing to take out a second mortgage. If you sand edges like this, you're definitely not alone. I did that for years, our little secret, and it technically works, but it's not comfy on these dainty little hands, and the holes catch and tear regularly. I'll show you a way better sandpaper that has no holes in a little bit. Regular sandpaper is just also tough to get in all the angles. It's not even an option to use your random orbital sander to sand the corners of your workpiece because you'll dent it really fast. I present to you the sanding sponge. This is from 3M, but other companies make them as well. They come in a bunch of different grits, and it's basically like a kitchen sponge, but a lot more rigid. You just need to ask yourself if you're sponge worthy.
So you think you're sponge worthy?
If you need even more rigidity, you can use this sanding block, also from 3M. It's fantastic if you need just a little more stability, and they make their own sandpaper that fits perfectly with this sanding block. The sponge can be used on irregular surfaces and curves, but here's an even better way to sand outside and inside curves. Many people think the drill is just for drilling, but that is ridiculous. They would be wrong. Dead wrong. These little sanding pads that go in the drill work great on the inside of bowls or trays. Really anything that your random orbital sander can't get to and you don't want to hand sand because it'll take 7 years, roughly. I use them on my turned items mostly, but feel free to explore the possibilities. I have the 2-inch and 3-inch sized pads, but you better believe I only bought the 3-inch sized sandpaper and then customized it myself.
Help me, I'm poor.
This is great for larger items that you want to take the sanding to, but what about smaller items that you want to take to the sanding and you may want a little more precision? That's where my next friend comes into play. The cool thing about the rigid belt / oscillating spindle sander is, well, it's both a belt and spindle sander. Long story short, I use the belt for outside edges like this zero clearance insert plate, and the spindle for inside edges like these letters. When you're done with one setting, it's fairly easy to switch it over to the other, but there are some drawbacks to this machine. After using either one for a while, it's almost impossible to unscrew it. Please now pause the video and take this time to make fun of me in the comments for being weak. I have these marks on it because I have to use this grippy tool to unscrew it. It's not really a big deal, but something to note. Also, although I found the belt is pretty gosh dang square, the spindle is not perfectly 90 degrees. But I haven't really used this on a project where it's been imperative that my edges were perfectly 90 degrees. The dust collection's not bad, and after 2 years of using this, I'm satisfied. I found that with sanding certain things, this is the best tool for the job, and it's phenomenal for sanding inside curves in my opinion, and that is the only opinion I have. I was actually a little worried about where I was going to put it because my shop is pretty small, but then I decided to build this 2-for-1 tool cart, which really helped. Alright, let's be honest. I really only built it so I could flip it repeatedly. But I don't need this tool a ton, which is definitely not the case with my random orbital sander. I use this tool all the time, and when I got it, I thought the bag would be good enough. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. You need suction. I kept hearing and seeing online that if you want good dust collection on your sander, you need to buy a dust extractor. But since I don't want to sell my spleen on the black market, I thought I'd find a cheaper option. And spoiler alert, I did! But before I found this really good solution, I thought it'd be fun to torture myself and connect a dust port to my shop vac hose. But the dust port didn't secure very strongly and kept detaching when I would use it. A really fun feature. So after I cried for a very short amount of time, I went out and bought the Rockler FlexiPort Dust Hose Kit. This gem comes with a sanding attachment and its own hose that attaches directly to the shop vac. The hose is really flexible and the port secures really tightly, so I've never had an issue with it detaching. Yeah, this is all well and good, but if you don't have the right sandpaper, you're going to be sanding for way longer than you need to be. A much overlooked item, but the most important part about sanding is, you guessed it, the sandpaper. You're smart. But for years I used the cheap Amazon special sandpaper and I wondered, why the heck is this sandpaper not lasting very long? Yeah, it's cheap, but when you factor in how many pieces of paper you're going to need compared to the more expensive paper, it actually could be more expensive. Jonathan Katz-Moses did a great video on that, which I'll link in the description. This is the 710W sandpaper from 3M, also called Extract, which is an underrated movie, by the way. Which reminds me that Bad Words, also starring Jason Bateman, was another underrated movie, but do not watch it with kids in the room. This sandpaper not only lasts a lot longer than the cheap stuff, but it has way better ventilation, so the dust collection is much better. Is it as durable as some other sandpaper? No, but it's not really an issue because we're not going to use it to hand sand anymore, are we? That was a little aggressive, but I'm not going to apologize for it. I do it out of love. Oh, here's a little tip. Always use a sanding pad with your random orbital because it'll make the built-in pad last longer. So in summary, this sandpaper is a little more expensive initially, but it's a lot more cost effective because it'll last longer. The same cannot be said for a certain sock company, which is super duper expensive, and I get holes in my socks after only a few months. Yeah, we're talking socks. But I digress. Actually, since we're throwing companies under the bus, I might as well add another one to the list. Chris from A Glimpse Inside came up with this upside down random orbital sander mount, which is phenomenal for sanding a lot of small pieces. This could be a great replacement for the rigid belt / spindle sander I talked about earlier for some projects, and the best part, this is only $79 and the rigid sander is $299. Now the juicy part. He came up with this product himself and started selling it on his website in March of 2022. Then just over a year later, Woodpeckers came out with a very similar product and started selling it. What a big coincidence.
There are no small coincidences and big coincidences.
He made a whole video about it on his YouTube channel. Unfortunately, this is not an isolated incident, and the same thing has happened with multiple woodworkers that I know, which is a shame. But here's the best part. Let's end on a positive note. What makes this woodworking and making community so great is when Chris came out with the YouTube video talking about all this shadiness, the community really showed up for him, and he sold over $34,000 in total products in a single month. So cool. This is a really cool product which works great, and I enjoy using it even more because now I finally have proper dust collection for my sander. The track saw is a great tool, but there are 5 upgrades that make it even better. And this little guy is helping me get to my ultimate goal as a woodworker. A goal that if you don't have, you probably should. I was told that this track would not move by the internet and a nice man at Woodcraft. And they were right, mostly. Like 90% right and 10%
It moved!
Now this could be user error, and it probably is, but to be sure it's stable, let's secure it a little better. Now you could use the Festool track clamps, and I'm confident that they work great, but I started sweating profusely when I looked at the price. Although my wife would have loved for me to spend that amount, let's look at a less expensive option. These track saw clamps from PowerTech work great, they keep my track nice and stable, and they are much cheaper. No more wandering cuts. I was also told that these micro jig clamps would work for my Festool track saw rail, but they don't. Now some clamps from micro jig may work, but the ones I have are no good. These I use for the micro jig match fit system, which is what they're made for. Yeah, it's quicker not to use the rail clamps, but it only takes like 20 seconds, and they're great if you need to be 100% sure that your rail won't move. When you're done with the track, you can hang it on the wall. Wait, do you have wall clips for your track? Do you want them? These clips from Drew Witt will do just the trick, and they're super easy to install. I've learned that wall space is super valuable, and I've tried to use my walls for storage as much as I can. No more leaning my track against the wall like a silly jelly bean. Okay, that was weird. Anyhoozles, this is not the only thing that Drew Evelyn Witt created for the track saw rail. These rail caps do a great job of preventing impaling.
And the Oscar goes to?
Too dramatic? Okay, they prevent the occasional minor abrasion, but also prevent the ends of your rails from getting dented, which could mess up your track saw cuts. He also sells this hose deflector, which is pretty dang nifty, excuse my French. If you have a dust extractor, this works great, but I don't have that kind of cash to throw around willy and nilly, so I use a hose kit, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now my hose doesn't get in the way, and my track looks like a speedboat. It's nice to kill two birds with one stone. Over the years, if I wanted to cut multiple pieces of plywood to the exact same width, I would use my table saw. But if you just have a job site saw, this could be complicated. When I was just starting out, I was having a lot of trouble cutting big sheet goods on my smaller saw. I would see other people having the same issues, and the people that weren't had a larger professional cabinet saw, but that just wasn't in my budget. The dust collection was also horrible with this saw. So I decided to do something about it. I decided to build a mobile table saw cart so my saw could be, well, mobile, and I made it mostly enclosed, so the dust collection was a lot better with my dust collector. But back to the sheet goods. I included this foldable wing on the side, so now there's a lot more tabletop surface when I cut these larger sheet goods, making it a lot easier. But what if for some unknown reason you do not want to click the link in the description below for extremely affordable step-by-step plans for this mobile table saw cart, which comes with a really in-depth instructional video? Well, that's where parallel guides will become your best friend. These are easy to calibrate when you first get them, which is not always the case with new tools. You set it to the exact distance you want, and now you can cut multiple pieces of wood to the exact same width. These are from T.H.O.M.A.S, and they're pretty expensive. But the risk with buying cheaper ones, and this goes with a lot of tools, is you risk sacrificing accuracy, durability, and/or ease of use. For some tools I'd risk it, but because the whole point of these parallel guides is to get accurate cuts for a precise size, I would be a little worried going with a cheaper version. If you don't do a lot of repeatable cuts, you probably don't need these, but they exist if you do. For me, a lot of my projects only require 2 plywood pieces to be the exact same length, and for that I just use the stack and cut method. Whenever I see videos on parallel guides, they're generally paired with another tool. This tool always used to confuse me, and I would think, is this even necessary?
Necessary?
This would fall perfectly in the unnecessary but saves a little time. I guess I kind of get it because that's what a lot of tools do. I just find I can get by just fine with a simple square. The tool I'm talking about is a straight edge guide. Now I don't have one of these, so your comment, "don't knock it till you try it," is perfectly valid. I just don't think it's completely necessary, and at $190, no thanks. Sidebar, these are things you should not knock until you try. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches, chicken and waffles, French fries with ice cream, and letting your cat choose your outfits. Basically, it quickly puts your track saw rail to exactly 90 degrees to your workpiece. Jason Bent made a great video on different rail squares on his channel, and it's definitely worth checking out. He always makes great videos. He also does mention one that's a little cheaper. If you have some extra money to spend, go for it, and I'm sure you'll be happy with your purchase, but I'm still gonna use my square. I also can see how it would be a lot easier to make sure your cuts are accurate with this tool. No matter what you cut, and if you saw my last video on dust collection, you know that just having a bag on your track saw does not cut the mustard. Yeah, that's expired. In order to collect the most dust possible, you need suction, and that's where the Rockler Dust Hose Kit comes in real handy. Their website says that it can stretch out to 12 feet, but I actually got it to 13, no big deal. And works a lot better than the bag at keeping the dusties out of my lungies. And that's the ultimate goal. You can also use a dust extractor, but those are pricey, and shop vacs are more not pricey. They're more pricey. More priceless? One of my big goals is to catch as much dust as possible so I can live a long and healthy life. That is the ultimate goal I alluded to in the intro. The next accessory is another step in that direction. When I started woodworking years ago, I was, how do I put this? Dumb? Okay, that may be a little harsh, but I was not at all concerned with dust collection, and that is objectively dumb. To summarize, I am not dumb, but I did a dumb thing. You are a smart and confident person. It's tough because when I started out, I didn't want to spend a ton of money on tools like most people, but cheaper tools generally have worse dust collection than more expensive tools. And I was a beginner, so I didn't know how to modify these tools to trap the dust. Fast forward to now, and I've either bought more expensive tools, or built furniture to help with dust collection, or bought reasonably priced accessories to keep the dust from killing me. Sorry, that was morbid. Along with the dust hose, this little guy will help with dust collection. This is the arbor hole cap from WhitWorks and plugs the open hole on the side of the saw. Should this be the first dust solution you make to your tools? No, but every little bit helps. It's reasonably priced and comes from a small business, which is always good to support.